All right, welcome to episode 4. Thanks for people who watched, the very little of you, and who liked it. We are getting 100% likes, though, for the likes that we do get.
Oh yeah,
They're probably all from family, but.
yeah, yeah,
All right. So, you wanted to talk about roles a little bit more, like cultural roles?
yeah. And what does that look like? On a day-to-day basis.
So, we
You
can
know,
define role a little bit. Like, when I say, like, cultural role, I mean it almost literally, like a role someone would play, like, in a movie or,
yeah,
play or something like that, right?
right,
And there's, like, I see culture. One of the functions of culture is to sort of supply a Rolodex of role templates,
uh-huh,
right? And so people don't have to find their own way. There's ready-made templates that you can use. The punk rocker, the conservative Christian, the left-wing woke person, the I don't know, the rich guy, the doctor, the lawyer, all these kind of things. Some of them are
yeah,
practical
yeah,
professions, but they come along with a certain role, and roles are assigned a value within the culture and so forth, right? And so when I talk about roles, I usually mean it's an acting out, a role playing, a
yeah.
cultural role. Yeah,
Well, and does it necessarily have a um, an element of pretense, like pretending, role playing?
definitely.
Yeah. And therefore then could be a departure from our own authenticity.
Yeah, I think that uh, so we're born into the strategy of cultural roles, right? And so we're socialized from a young child to, and we're encouraged to play a role, right? To pick one where our parents want us to be a doctor or a lawyer or
Exactly.
astronaut or
Yeah.
this or that, right? And we
Yeah.
feel a
So
sense of pressure,
they teach us how to read the Rolodex.
right? And like behaviors that are sort of relegated to like a counterculture or something like that, or go against the function of culture, which is to convince us that there's a symbolic reality that exists that is separate from our biological reality, and through this interaction, symbolically, we can gain a sense of some kind of immortality, either literal immortality through religion or symbolic immortality through cultural achievement or something like that. And then we want to avoid reminders of our own animality, right? And so
Our own what?
animality, that we're animals, that we're.
Oh, yeah.
I
Okay.
think Sheldon Solomon would say we're rotting bags of defecating meat, destined to die a meaningless death, no important than a lizard or a potato.
Yeah.
That sort
Yeah.
of reality, we want to avoid that at all costs, right? And so, like a lot of the things we can't avoid, like taking shits and stuff like that, that's like ritualized, right? So you hide
Yeah.
yourself in the bathroom by yourself. You lock the doors. If someone tries to walk in, you freak out because you're ashamed of your own animality and you're sitting there defecating, right? So
Yeah.
right? So children have to be socialized to handle their bodily functions and stuff like that in a certain way to cover their bodies, so they don't show their animality to other people and shame themselves, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's two steps: is to deny our animality, to deny immortality and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
and then to socialize people into this participation in the cultural play. You know,
Right.
yeah. And so
I
like
recognize all that.
I would say like it's kind of like if you pretend you represent the human species, right, and you just achieved self awareness just now, and you're looking around, right, and you realize all of a sudden you're going to die someday, right? You see how giant and terrifying and beautiful the world is. It's completely overwhelming. This the sheer ambiguity and beauty and intensity, like you shriek. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Well, it's an acute awesome.
right. I think people from the start of culture and the start of humanity, we escaped into delusion immediately, right? So
Uh-huh.
so I don't think there's been a lot of time in actual discovery about reality and what reality is, what it even means to be authentic. You know, what is my authentic self? Because it's so connected to cultural symbolism and stuff, right?
Right.
So I think that that's the frontier is this sort of denial of culture, this repression of culture, and almost like a what is a person called who likes to hurt themselves or who enjoys being hurt by
Yeah.
it's a
A masochist.
masochist, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
masochistic avoidance of anxiety buffering culture to where you yourself have to, it's almost like the hero's journey, but then it's so tricky because then you can create a hero story or a hero role out
A
of,
symbolic
rejecting
hero.
culture, right? So it's
Yeah.
like,
Well,
yeah,
hang on a second. Um, I wanted to just say more about one of your terms there. Um, darn it, but I lost it. So maybe it'll come back up again. Yeah. So I'm with you. I recognize what you're saying. Um, oh, about the frontier. You um, you said you referred to the frontier, and do, do you remember where you made that statement and what you were just sharing?
yeah. The front authenticity would be the frontier, like
Yeah,
direct
yeah, okay.
experience or direct perception. If we're even capable of it at this point, that would be like the frontier, something
Well,
that
and
would be pretty new.
I think one of the roles that some people have taken up uh, that is outside the cultural norm, outside the consensus reality, uh, are people who are in pursuit of authenticity, which I think artists tend to be. I mean, there's two kinds of artists. There's the well-trained ones, like the one that told you that you couldn't refer to yourself as an artist because you don't have initials after your name, and then there are the artists who are just busy doing art,
Mm-hmm.
creating, right? Or another term that is synonymous with the word artist right now in what I'm saying is creatives. Those of us who have decided that our role in society is to investigate what's outside of consensus and to see if there's a better consensus that we can contribute to.
Yeah.
So am I talking about what's inside of what you were saying, frontier?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week when we were talking about the different roles, the artist, the productive type, whatever. And we,
Right.
we touched on this lone wolf thing for just a minute, but we
Exactly.
didn't
Yeah.
dive very deep into it.
That was one of the things I wanted to hear more from you about.
But I'm reluctant to say, yeah, I'm one of those people because that's an enticing little, you know,
You can get in trouble there.
hero sort of delusion that you can get into. Yeah, that
You
you
can
can get
get
into with that kind of
delusional.
stuff. Right.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I think um, I mean, each person has to kind of answer this type of question for themselves. Who am I and what am I up to? But from what I know about you, uh, you've done a very good job of not complying to a strict socially defined role as the totality of who you are. And you've created a kind of a middle way where you have one foot in consensus symbolic reality, and which is how your primary source of income comes from playing a role. But I think that you bring a level of authenticity of who you are. Thus, you're in Houston instead of Seattle now.
Yeah.
Had you been willing to comply to a prescribed role that you had signed up for, then you would probably still be in Seattle.
Yeah, I'm not a
So you
conformist, that's for
you
sure.
you bring it's like you bring a synthesis of the two, of the compliance and of the creative.
Yeah, well, I have a family to feed, and I want to extract a certain amount of wealth and live comfortably and stuff
Yeah,
like that. And I have goals financially, right?
exactly.
Yeah, and then, but I,
So
I don't want to do
you
anything that I don't. I won't do anything that doesn't make rational sense to me, no matter how much trouble it gets me. And if I don't agree with it and it doesn't make sense, I'm not going to do it. I don't care.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, making sense is probably, I think those words probably refer to your integrity.
Yeah, I just think I like reality is the ultimate authority, right? And I don't think I have any better grip on it than anyone else. But only judgment we can go by is our own best, right? And so, like,
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree with that.
I have to go by my own best judgment in reality as I see it, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Well, and that comes back to agency, that your capacity to deal with the existential angst of agency, of free will, that you you're willing to occupy that place between stimulus and response, and and I think you've become skilled at it. It's like you haven't had to retreat away from that, because even when you do something that is the same thing that somebody being compliant to social expectations, even when you're behaving the same way that person would behave, you're not doing that behavior for the same cause or purpose or reason. You're not escaping the existential angst of your own free will. You you're 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 cooperating rather than complying.
I do.
That's my opinion. That's my observation of you.
Thank you. I do struggle a lot with will, though. Like, I'm getting better at it, but it's definitely a practice. Is like, because I'm an impulsive person. Like,
Oh, you mean as in like discipline, willpower
yeah,
type will?
yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and I kind of think that comes with being willing to be on a long tether from the rest of reality. Is the longer the tether, the more self indulgent we'll become, because we lose our have tos.
right. That's what my thing is, self indulgence with eating and drinking and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm down like 48 pounds as of today, so
Yeah,
that's going good. And I
it's showing. You're looking good, and congratulations on your success with that, because that doesn't come easy,
no,
from
it's
what
really
I'm
hard. Yeah,
understanding. And uh, your percentage of progress, you're way ahead of me, because I hover between 196 and 200, and I just can't. I can pull it back away from 200, because it becomes kind of a have to, you know. But as soon as it becomes totally voluntary, free will, um, then I dip into the Girl Scout cookies.
yeah. But like what I'm saying is that all that I pay for my independence, right? The way my independence of mind, I
Uh-huh.
pay for the risk taking I do. I pay for not, being accepted in any sort of group. I've never had like a big group of friends. I've always been kind of an outcast because I had really terrible social skills when I was younger, right? But it forced me either, But I think psychedelics had a huge impact on me, and so have you. But I wear a lot of that on my body and fat, the impulsive eating and all this kind of stuff. So I have these
Yeah, yeah,
other, ways, like self medicating and stuff like that through drinking.
yeah,
So it's like it's not free. I pay for it in different ways, right? And so I'm not culturally well rounded. I'm an independent thinker and stuff like that. But I've also, been really self destructive in the way I treat myself and my body at the same time.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
When we're at our best, we are at our best, and there's just nothing better. But when we're at our worst, we're also at our worst.
Yeah.
I read an article today that was, I think, relates to what we're talking about, and it it had to do with adults parenting adults, and the gosh, I wish I remember the words, but it was a very compassionate, warm-hearted kind of guidance type of parenting that was being talked about, and but it was about the fact that we never outgrow our childhood. I would say I hope we never outgrow our childhood, but this article was starting with the premise that Sometimes we're 8 years old, and sometimes we have the wisdom of an 80-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes everywhere in between. And so when we have a fellow human being who is acting out in a very immature way, to approach it the way you would in compassionate parenting, and to offer support to the person, to grow up, to be more mature in the way they handle something. Now, the details of how to do that is totally ambiguous, but in terms of the principle, or the general intent about, parenting. And so anyway, it was an interesting article, but I think it relates to the when people don't have the willpower to behave with the kind of wisdom that they possess, and
Yeah.
just reminding each other that, I guess the phrase, we're better than this, or you're better than that, or your mom has a great, very profound philosophical statement or question, and that is, how does it serve you?
Right.
And so, so when we're acting out, if someone reminds us, does this really work? How does this serve you? Then it quickens that wiser, more experienced person comes to the fore, kind of wakes up, right? And anyway, I saw some kind of a connection between that article and what we were talking about related to the discipline, and that it's a mixed bag. That was the connecting point. Is that, yeah, sometimes we're very disciplined and focused, and then other times um, we're the compulsive 2-year-old that's going to eat all the cookies we can get.
But getting back to the role thing, because you wanted to talk
Yeah.
about, there's something specific you wanted to address, I think, right, with the roles? Because you wanted to get
Well,
back to it.
exactly,
Mhm.
because we had gone down a rabbit hole there. Yeah, not specific, just more around what does that look like? The roles, and we were touching on that until we dropped into we got inside of one of the ideas that we had on the table there. Um, so I think that there's way more roles. Let's see, let me back up. So those four roles that Ronk talks about, it's the artist, the producer, the well-rounded, the schizophrenic,
Yeah.
and I don't know that the renegade, or the what was the one you talked about? I guess maybe if with that one would fit in maybe the artist role, from
Yeah, maybe the
as
lone
far as
wolf. Yeah.
Ronk's framework. But those aren't so much roles as they are categories of roles.
Yeah.
Because
Well, because like we were talking about, like it's hard, like because if you think about things on a biological level, and you think about how every member of a wolf pack, have a specific rule, temperament, but those temperaments were selected through evolution to serve a specific group because they
right,
evolved together as a group, and we are social animals too. We come from groups of gorillas and stuff like that, and we would evolve similarly to where each temperament type was supposed to play an important role for the group. But
yeah,
but how does that, like, the complicated thing is for me is trying to understand. Okay, well, how it doesn't seem like there's a 1-to-1, between like a role, a societal role, and then like a cultural role, or maybe there is. Maybe like a laborer, like someone who's just strong and he's built to like lift heavy things, and he, becomes like a mechanic, or a garbage man or something like that. There's these very, masculine, strong, labor type people.
yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
they don't really possess a lot of will, though. They mostly do what they're told and stuff like that, and so but they still have to survive in a culture, and they still have to extract some sort of sense of self-esteem and self-worth and meaning from life and stuff like that, right? And I'm just wondering, yeah. So it's easy. It's not as straightforward to me culturally as it is like thinking about group temperaments. So maybe the auto ranks categories work a little better. They're a little more broad, but it's a little
Yeah,
harder to understand on a
they're
detail
broad
level.
enough. They're broad enough to include all of the infinite variety of roles that people play um, because we have a symbolic reality. Each person, we each have our own personal reality that is based on our paradigm, what our nervous system, our mind has put together from having been on the planet for the length of time we have. We have that personal world, and we have these needs that we will be compelled to to pursue the fulfillment of those needs. And the needs may vary from one individual to the other, is how I'm seeing all this. But we will figure out a track to run on. We'll figure out a pattern. We'll figure out a behavioral pattern. We'll figure out a role. Like one of the major roles that I figured out for myself as a creative was business consulting as an organization development consultant. So then I crafted for myself a role, much like selecting a suit of clothes to wear, making sure that the sleeves are the right length and I like the pattern of the shirt and so on. But I created this role for me to actualize in the marketplace as a way to fulfill my need for social esteem and income.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked, pretty well, for that. But it was really weird. Um, Very unique. The number of people who come from the background that I come from that are doing the kind of work that I was working on doing. Um, there might be 10 or 15 of us in the United States.
Can we
you know?
can we like you say, stick a pin right there in what you said, and
Yeah.
maybe go off subject to dig deeper into what you're saying though?
Yeah.
So, like, right. So like we're in like the safety of the um I don't know what you would call it, symbolic cave, right?
Yeah.
And we have our cultural roles and stuff like that. A lot of us, we can just be well adjusted to those roles. We'll let somebody else describe reality for us and tell us what our
Right.
roles ought to be.
Yeah.
What meaning
Yeah.
is. What our purpose to life is, and we're fine, right? And the best we can do is to try to live as comfortable life as possible. And to be as well rounded as possible.
Right.
And then, but there is this urge to try to understand the nature of reality, right? To try to see past the cultural system. But in that sense, there's no guarantee that there's anything out there, right? That you're not just going to do harm to yourself by purposefully dismantling the cultural framework and meaning systems that provides you a sense of value and buffer anxiety. So you take a risk because there might not be anything of value on the other side. Maybe it is all carnage and terror and meaninglessness.
You're inside of the concept of the frontier. You're describing what's in
Right. There's
what
risk out there, right?
the word frontier refers to a reality, and you're describing that reality.
I was describing that there's a risk that you take in letting go of cultural symbolism in exchange for some sort of
Transcendency.
transcendence, right? Because maybe there's nothing out there
Maybe
but
there's
carnage.
nothing. That's
right?
why I'm a very strong advocate of keeping it tethered. Tie your tail to a post before you go into that space.
Right. So you have to, if you're going to take the risk of rejecting culture, and trying to dismantle your own ego and stuff like that through whatever means, psychedelics, meditation, all these kind of things, you have to have a reasonable degree of faith that there's going to be a payoff, right? That there's going to be a better way of living discovered in a more happy, more peaceful state that you can achieve, right? And to do that, you have to be able to make an educated Yes, and in order to do that, you have to believe that there is a way for you to perceive reality accurately. And so that's kind of like what I was saying, that the big piece to this is like, how do you suss out truth from noise, right? From fact from delusion, reality from
Well,
unreality.
fact from fiction,
Right. And
or reality
well,
from delusion.
well, for one, like we live in a very we live in a hallucination, basically, right? Just perceptually, because the light waves bounce off the objects, right? Our eyes pick it up, our brains, recreate that image for us in our heads. It's not what's actually going on there. It's an interpretation that we're experiencing as a hallucination.
Exactly.
And it's not even at the same time. It's
this. What you're saying right there pertains to the sound of the tree in the forest. That riddle, or the beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
The experience of beauty is in here within myself. It's a construct. It's a type of hallucination.
Yeah.
Is that? Am I getting you?
Right. I'm going to talk about like 3 different categories really quick, though. So that's one of them. Right. Is this perceptual problem we have, where reality only exists in our head, and we can't really say for sure what reality is outside of our own perceptions, right? And our perceptions are super. They're influenced by culture to such a degree that it almost becomes impossible to extricate or see past culture.
Right.
Another thing is, there's this guy Donald Hoffman. He's an evolutionary biologist, right?
This is another category you're going to.
Yeah, related, but another category is this idea of fitness versus accuracy in evolution, right? And so they ran a bunch of experiments. A lot of them are just computer modeling and stuff like that. But he came to the conclusion that evolution does not care one shit about accuracy or reality. All it cares about is fitness, right? And a good example he gives is like, if you tell you have 2 groups of children, right? You tell one group of children that porcupines can throw their what are they called, spines or whatever they're called.
Yeah, right.
And then you tell another group of children the truth. They can't throw them. You can only get hurt if you touch them, right?
Yeah.
So one group of children will have an evolutionary advantage. They're less likely to get hurt by the porcupine because they think it can throw spines at them, right? So the misconception is what gives them fitness over the other children who might take more risk and get closer, or are more likely to get hurt by the porcupine because they understand the truth, right? So nature selects for fitness, not accuracy. And he says that in the 1 billion, 2 billion, or 3 billion or so years, or whatever you want to say, from single-cell organisms to now, that we are so far away from reality that it's literally the same as an icon on a computer screen versus the code.
Sure.
Like, we have no idea what reality is. It's because we're evolved. Our evolution and even our like biological perception mechanisms aren't tuned for accuracy. They're tuned for fitness.
Yeah.
Right. And then those are both like biological problems, right? So perceptive, and then just that we're not evolved. I guess they're the same thing. Maybe they're related. But then there's this other idea about, because there's different kinds of truth that we talk about. One is truth as 2 + 2 = 4, right? This is a phone. I want to perceive reality accuracy. And another one is truth as how should I live, right? What should my moral values be, right? What feels like truth in terms of ethics and stuff like that, right? And like, how do we suss out our truth, our philosophy for living, right? And so I always come back to this concept of non-duality. It bothers me a lot because, like, I gave you that idea, or that I talked about, like when you're eating a piece of chicken, what's happening? Integration or disintegration, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's both. It's just it's a single phenomena. It's a single chemical phenomena taking place. But for the chicken, it's destruction, and for me, it's creation, right? And so, like, we see destruction and creation, we tend to think of them as 2 separate phenomena, when in reality they're the exact same thing. They're the same occurrence from different perspectives.
I think that's a good example of yin yang.
Right. So it's like, for example, um, what right does one thing have to exist over another? Right? Like, what right do, I don't know, just say warring countries, right? So you say it's terrible that this country invaded and destroyed that country, right?
Yeah.
But that to the winner, that's not destruction; it's creation, because now they can expand their kingdom,
Well,
and
and
they,
we have a real live example of that going on with Russia and Ukraine. And from what I understand, from Putin's perspective, he's restoring the motherland,
right. So
and so he has the same brain chemistry about invading Ukraine as Ukraine has of protecting itself from being invaded. Because to them, protecting the motherland, which is a symbolic it's a piece of symbolic reality, as I understand that how you use the term. But both of them have basically the same brain chemistry, but in opposition.
right, so it's like, well, if everything has equal right to exist, right,
Yeah.
and there any sort of sense of good and evil you can base on whether something is creative or destruction is fundamentally narcissistic, right? It's biased to your own point of view,
Uh huh.
right? And there's this whole idea about survival of the fittest, right? The only things that should be alive are the ones that survive, that have the means to survive, and the weaker things are going to die off, and that's just reality, right? And so it's just like, well, how do you suss out any sort of sense of morality or ethics based on the reality of non-duality and the reality that we live in a terrifying planet where life eats life, it's all carnage and death, and the strongest survive, right? So it's like, well, what do you base in? But there's still something intuitive that we think about empathy and love and all this kind of stuff, right? There's something about it, even though it doesn't really serve anything practical in terms of like survival outside of just working together as a group. But like, if you think about it, even though human beings are very destructive, uh, we think to ourselves like amphibians are going extinct because of our behavior, and a lot of people feel really terrible about that. What other species on the planet would give a shit if another species is going extinct, right?
Uh huh.
They just expand. Like an invasive species will move somewhere, and it'll expand until it consumes all its resources and maybe even kills itself. It doesn't have the ability to stop and look and have a sense of morality or something about the impact it's having on the world, right? That seems very unique to human beings.
So I
So,
think there's something to draw a circle around here, and that is the capacity to guess at consequences. That's a function of consciousness. It's a greater level of aliveness or awakeness of consciousness. It's also, I believe, referred to by some authors as cosmic consciousness. Is where we can we it matters to us to be mindful of the consequences of our actions. That's a very peculiar kind of consciousness compared to all the rest of biology that doesn't doesn't seem to be exhibiting it, and that would be beside the point, because even if there were other primates that had that same level of consciousness we're talking about, we know that human beings have the potential for that level of consciousness, and a lot of us populate uh, that that I don't know if populate's the right word, but I'll use it. Populate that state of consciousness. I know for myself that I'm not the. I believe that I'm not the only one. Um, I believe this includes you, but I know for utter certainty that I feel in my body a visceral concern for the consequences of my action. And then, so what I just said right there, I think is an important piece of what you're talking about.
it's a piece, but I think it goes. a little further than that.
Sure, it does.
Because that will relate back to like narcissism, right? Where, okay, I'm smart enough to understand my actions are going to have consequences for me down the road because we're destroying environments, right? But even I think people have the capacity to feel bad or feel remorse or feel empathy towards something being destroyed that is not going to impact us in the long run, right? I think that it's unique to human beings because we talked about how there's besides the anxiety about death and the space between stimulus and response, there's this whole other thing about human beings about being self-aware, right? Having this natural intelligence or this awakening into the artificial intelligence, but natural intelligence, the subsystem becoming self-aware, right? And we have the ability to project empathy almost, or to empathize, to understand that we ourselves would not want to be destroyed, and we can see that other life do not want to be destroyed, and so somehow as a consequence there's almost like I think Eric Fromm would call it ego expansion, where
Eric Fromm,
would call it where we have the ability to
ego
expands.
Let me see if I'm getting it.
Sure.
Is where my ego expands to include your well-being.
Right. Exactly.
Or the well-being of a symbol, because this can happen for a thing that has meaning,
Or toad. Whatever.
Yeah, and so I like that concept of expanding the ego. Because I think the ego is an essential component to a fully functioning human being. It's just a matter of how evolved is the ego, or in this case we could say how expanded. So it's like you've caused reality with one of my areas of pretty intense study for myself back at the Laboratory of Life, being the scientist and the guinea pig, right? And what the conclusion I've come to, but I'm wanting to check and see if my conclusion is consistent with what you're saying, is that in the evolution of human consciousness, we develop this capacity, the evolution of my consciousness, which would be an example of human consciousness. I have developed the ability to care about what somebody else cares about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's related. I think that happens as a result of empathy, compassion, and a deep personal care and concern for mutual well-being is what expands that ego. In fact, the book that we're working on trying to get published is that love is a better way of working with people. So it's connected directly with what you just now, the question you're putting on the table.
Right.
And so this is some of the answer that I've found for myself so far about that question that you're posing.
But I think to me it's very profound in that. So we have these pro-social programs because we live in a group, right? We're group
programs
animals.
As in internal mental programs or
Right.
systems like social systems.
No, internal mental programs like biological programs that.
Right. Okay.
So we want to be pro-social, maximize cooperation, minimize conflict within the group. Outside the group, we'll destroy them, create carnage is fine, but within the group, since we have these capacities, we, as autonomous, self-aware sort of, subroutines, have the ability to look within ourselves and see the capacity for empathy, for compassion, for forgiving, even forgiveness, and all these sort of things within ourselves that evolved in a practical sense for survival within a group, right? But then we can choose to strengthen them, right?
We can nurture them, yes.
Yeah, to nurture them, to expand them, to have those sort of values occupy more of the space within ourselves than they would have naturally by natural selection, right? And so it shows that there's something there, some autonomous thing that exists, right? That for
It exists internally.
yeah, within the human being,
Yeah.
that for some reason, because it doesn't make a lot of, maybe it makes practical sense, but you could probably interpret this in like just a purely evolutionary way. It's just it's fit to behave a certain way, but I think there's something more to it, because I think there's people out there, and I've met a lot of them, in my work, that I used to do, that are are compassionate and altruistic to an impractical extent, right? And
Yes. Yes.
it's something that they've nurtured and they've chosen to nurture within themselves, and those people are some of the most grounded and self-confident and undelusional people I've ever met, right? So there's
Now, wait a minute. Let me share. I don't want to get confused here. The people who have taken, let's call it compassion, this concern for others, but they have taken the compassion to a dysfunctional level. But
not, not dysfunctional, impractical in terms of needing it to do it to get along in society or whatever. Where it's not necessary for them to survive.
Okay,
right.
we'll stay with your word. To an impractical state, but they are the most grounded people that you've known.
Right.
That's interesting. So
And self-confident.
Well, yes, and self-confidence is the foundation of everything else. And what we're talking about here, the significance of self-confidence in a grounded, realistic way can't be overstated. The significance of that, in my opinion. So that stands out. What you just said there. It's also consistent with many experiences that I've had. So I think I can, from my own experience, affirm the accuracy of what you just said about that people who, on the surface, appear to be impractical because of their care and concern for self and others, are the most grounded. And I think there's a direct connection between that condition you're referring to as being grounded, because that points to a reality, right?
Right.
So being in that state of what we call grounded and being functional, as in fit for not just survival but thriving.
Mm.
I think there's an evolutionary function going on right there.
Well, you can thrive and be fit and be pro-social to a practical extent, right? Like, for example, like someone who's done well in business or something like that, right? And he's got a great family, beautiful wife, good kids, got everything going to him, but then has a really strong need to go in and volunteer and mentor murderers in prison for some reason, right?
Yeah.
And the only thing you can suss out about this person in your interaction with him, the only reason why he's there is because he has the capacity to care about these people and he wants to make a positive difference in their lives, right? So there's no reason for him to do it, right? Like, he's already successful, he's got a great family, all that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of different examples of this kind of thing where there's no practical reason for them to do it because they've already won at life and being successful and stuff. But for some reason, there's this extra thing where people...
This additional thing. What I want to do is I want to put the reality behind the word practical, because that refers to something that's actually real, right? A kind of a particular kind of circumstance that we call that practical. Um, so I'll the, this so I'll share a quick story about one of my big ahas. Um, and I this was in a an art class when I was talking with the professor uh, about aesthetics, and I made the comment about how something beautiful, it might be beautiful and nice to look at, but it doesn't have any practicality. And he says, well, what isn't practical about appearance of beauty? Why can't that in and of itself be a practical thing? You know?
Yeah.
And the light went on for me, and it's like, yeah, that's a matter of choice. I can choose to see aesthetics, beauty as frivolous, of no value, or I can decide that it is, which it already was for me. It was a decision that I had already made long before I discovered that I was an artist, without even being aware of that aesthetics matters to me.
All right, you made a good point there. Could I bring it? Can I
Yeah.
talk about? Okay. So yeah, you bring up a really good point, and that's kind of exactly what I'm talking about. Is that aesthetic thing? It doesn't seem practical, right?
Yeah.
And so when I use the word practical, I'm just talking about something necessary to survive, right? That's it. What practical? But there's these other things about human beings. That's a good one. Aesthetics.
Yeah.
This experience of beauty. Wow. Curiosity. Not just curiosity to survive. Wondering how things work so you can make things better for yourself to survive, but a natural curiosity about life and the world, right?
So you're making
There's
a distinction here between the practicality of survival and the practicality of thriving.
Right. So my premise is, or my theory is, that like this curiosity, aesthetics, this compassion and ability to empathize and forgive and stuff like
Yeah.
that, is a function of becoming self-aware. It's a function of consciousness becoming.
Yeah.
Even though we're consciousness in these biological machines that can murder and destroy, there's something unique about consciousness and evolving consciousness and self-awareness and agency that has the capacity to do things, to experience curiosity, aesthetics, love, and all this kind of thing in a way that we don't have to rationalize and bring back to some biological evolutionary function. I think that's an error. You can do that if you want to, but I think that there's something novel going on here, and so there's something unique to consciousness, evolving consciousness, that has these attributes.
You're proposing that there's more to evolution than just survival. That we've evolved this capacity, this curiosity, this potential for something more than survival?
No, I'm not. I'm saying that we evolved the capacity to think and problem solve and delay response. We have the space between stimulus and response. We developed a cognitive intelligence because we had to rapidly adapt to changing environments, and the normal course of epigenetics is not going to work, right? And so natural selection have selected for the most intelligent of us. A response to that was an accident that happened, a complete fluke accident where we became self-aware, right? So these attributes associated with being self-aware and being conscious, and how they... so I don't think like aesthetics is a aesthetics or curiosity or this level of love and compassion and stuff like that can be directly linked to evolution by natural selection, right?
Well,
I think it's something that happened because of it, an accident that happened because of it. But you can't directly. They don't have that evolutionary or practical sort of.
I think that's a matter of definition, because for me it's very clear. Just like it was very clear to my art instructor that aesthetics had a practical application. Um, I see that the aesthetics and that whole realm we're talking about, the more further evolved, let's call it thriving. That thriving, I can see a direct corollary between a cause and effect corollary between thriving and the process of evolution that has provided surviving. But so I don't see it as an accident. I see it as inevitable. That that the process of learning how to survive, it was inevitable that that process would lead to the awakening to what we're calling thriving, or I'm calling thriving right here. Now, I'm not going to be able to provide you know a succinct explanation of that connection, cause and effect connection. I'm not going to be able to provide a succinct explanation of that, in 40 words or less. Maybe not in 4,000 words, but I intuitively I can see the cause and effect that links thriving to the practicality of the natural selectivity of evolution has naturally selected the capacity for these other qualities that we're talking about, that we're calling thriving.
Well, what I'm saying, let's see. What I'm defending against then is there's a quick dismissal, I think, in evolutionary psychologists and biologists
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and just people who fancy themselves materialists and philosophers and stuff like
Right.
that, to dismiss these uniquely human traits of curiosity, aesthetics, compassion, forgiveness, all these kind of things to that level, as just a function of evolution by natural selection.
The dismissiveness there, I'm with you. I'll get shoulder to shoulder with you and push back on that dismissiveness.
Right. I think there's something sacred there, and I think that it has something to do with agency and self-awareness.
Yeah.
With free will.
I agree.
And we're not told, we don't have complete free will. A lot of our will is not free, but there is a little bit in there, right? And this little bit of what we call human, that's outside the animal and outside of all the symbolic, cultural, delusional shit. There's a nugget in there.
Yeah.
There's something special
No, I
there,
agree
right?
with you. I agree 100%.
Right. Okay. And so, we talked about the guys at Stanford before,
Right. Dr. Doty.
do the study on altruism,
Yeah.
and they study Tibetan monks,
Right.
right? Because monks have the compassion meditation and stuff like that, and they've taken some of the experiments they did was with abused children, right?
Uh-huh.
So they'll take someone who is in a group home, is violent, is trying to molest other kids and stuff like that because they've been really really damaged kids, right?
Right.
They'll take it and they'll make this kid nurture something, take care of a horse, right? They have to brush it every day and stuff like
Right.
that. And it's almost like compassion therapy where they're just teaching it to be compassionate about. They're not addressing anything.
Capacity.
Right. But it's very healing. So those kids start getting in less fights. They start getting better grades. They start being more pro-social, all this kind of stuff. They're not addressing anything on a psychoanalytical level. All they're doing is practicing nurturing and caring for another species, another being, right? And there's something about that in itself. And so, finally to get back to what I think it's interesting, out of all the chaos and carnage, of the universe, and the whole idea of non-duality, where the Jews don't have any more right to exist than the Nazis, and the way nature plays out is the Nazis will win sometimes, the Jews will go extinct, and that no one has any right to exist beyond what they can prove out in real life.
Yeah,
it's,
right.
Survival of the fittest and all this kind of stuff.
Is that basically a might is right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the philosophy of a lot of people in the
exactly.
United States,
Yeah.
especially, right? But isn't it interesting, or to me it's pretty amazing, that if all the phenomena exist in the entire universe, there seems to be this subset of phenomena of forgiveness, compassion, empathy, aesthetic and curiosity. There's these 4 or 5 different traits or practices that for some reason undermine ecstatic terror and anxiety.
It
They
undermines
undermine
what?
it's like existential terror, existential anxiety, um, guilt, the fear of freedom.
The undermining. Uh, I'm not getting something there about the concept of undermining, as in destructive too, undermining as in destroying, or undermining as in supportive.
No, these phenomena or some behaviors or whatever they are, for some reason they have a counter reaction. Like they reduce anxiety, they reduce guilt,
They alleviate.
reduce, they
In
alleviate.
fact,
Right.
that's one of the key points. There's multiple points in Doty's work, or his organization's work too. Is the we're under a constant state of stress stimulus. And back to the symbolic reality is really quite toxic. Our public symbolic reality is really very unhealthy right now.
Reality is too.
And
The nature
well,
is.
nature can be threatening, but Nate, you know that. So I don't want to go too far that direction. But anyway, he asserts that we're under this constant state of stress, and that the existential threat, the illusion of existential threat, because when somebody says something on the news media, or somebody a podcast, maybe even some of the stuff that I say from time to time, it can cause people to feel threatened, right? Even though I'm of no threat, right? But people can feel threatened. So we live in this symbolic world that is overwhelmed constantly, not 100%, maybe only 80% of the time, but so much of the time, the symbolic world that we live in is activating our survival response, which is a stressor and releases the hormones related that mess with our immune system and whatnot. This is all I'm adapting from Doty's content, his work. That compassion and altruism is a treatment for that. That's one of the key things in what I've read about his work, is that this is a treatment. And there couldn't be anything more practical than dealing with the horror and toxicity of our current symbolic reality, because now we're down to biological survival, not just thriving. But that brushing the horse, caring about a plant, caring about something other than our own immediate physical self, does something to us physically that makes our life healthier and also more survivable.
Right, practicing forgiveness.
That's another one. We now have. This is about the progress. We've talked before about what looks like it's going backwards, but here's a place where we're going forward, where the idea of forgiving isn't something you do for the other person. You do it for your own well-being. So there's a very selfish reason to be forgiving. A very wholesome, selfish reason.
There can be an altruistic reason for forgiveness too, to alleviate guilt in the other person and forgive.
And so this kind of, say, a psychological interdependency between human beings that is showing up. I would even say a spiritual interdependency that we have, that requires love as a way to address that dimension that we've been talking about here for most of our conversation today. Everything we've said, for me, fits quite well into the encapsulating concept of love. Not love as a passion, not love as erotic sensation, not love as even affection or desire, but an attitude of deep personal care and concern for mutual well-being. And I think that quality of consciousness that I call love, it is consistent. It's a space in which everything that you've just now talked about kind of fits inside of that. in me.
Uh,
I'm making a little bit of a shot here at connecting the practicality of aesthetics and curiosity and compassion as expressions of love, deep care and concern for mutual well-being. That 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 there's something very practical about that, and I think Doty's work does a lot to provide evidence to support that.
yeah, I don't know if I agree 100% with that.
Yeah,
I mean, like I said, you can interpret it that way if you want to. Anyone can interpret it as a function of evolution, but the symbolic reality exists to buffer anxiety, to buffer existential guilt, and all that kind of stuff, right?
well, but it does more than
So,
that, doesn't it, Jason? Doesn't
well, no,
symbolic
I'm like two
reality?
steps away from getting back to like my point where I
Okay.
wanted to. I don't want to get off on too many
Yeah.
different things.
All right.
What I see is like this subset we talked about, the forgiveness, empathy, all these kind of things, as I see it as something that is not required for survival, and it's sort of like and we're talking about to an extraordinary degree. Obviously, pro-social behavior within a group makes sense for survival, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about this uniquely human stuff, curiosity, aesthetics,
Yeah.
altruism, all these kind of things, right? So I see that as almost like either a miracle or like just an amazing accident that it happens to exist, right? So that's what's why I told you, like I think it was our first podcast, that I agree with the Christians that the only true salvation is through Christ. If you see Christ as just the lived sort of the lived philosophy or just like a living example of how to use forgiveness, compassion, these sort of things, right? And so
Yeah,
if you yeah
what is sometimes referred to as Christ consciousness.
right, and so that's what I mean by and it really is like because the culture has got us this far, right? It's created a buffer for our anxiety. We can deplete our anxiety in cultural action, but the thing is, it doesn't go anywhere. It's always there. And so if the culture breaks down or losing its meaning, the anxiety is thrust back upon us. And then when the anxiety gets thrust back upon us because of our own cultural destruction or something like that, we usually project it and want to kill some other people or something like
Yeah,
that. It's a
yeah,
vicious
right.
cycle we're in, right?
Yeah.
So there has to be, but I don't think this is necessarily the direction we're heading in an evolutionary sense. I think we can just as easily destroy ourselves and we all go extinct, right? But there is this capacity to use will to further develop these positive qualities. And then when you do that, for some reason, that reduces existential anxiety and delusion and stuff like that. And so then when we talked about earlier, it's a big risk rejecting cultural roles and rejecting the culture and taking the risk of having all that anxiety be thrust back upon you when there's maybe not something out there that's going to replace it, or maybe you find out it's all terror.
Yeah, yeah. So
Right?
I'm seeing a specific to what you said, risk
Right.
there. Because it's like if you let go of the benefits of the cultural symbolic reality as your redemption from existential angst, and you let go of that and pursue this other thing, which, if I'm interpreting what you said accurately, it's the pursuit of Christ consciousness.
No.
For me, it's the pursuit of do what my love would do, which I think is pretty much identical to pursuing Christ consciousness. What if it doesn't work? And then can I go back, and get at least some relief from the cultural symbolism stuff? And it's like, well, we don't know.
But that's not exact. That's kind of what I'm saying. But what we were talking about before is the ability to see the world accurately, right? And to reject, cultural delusion and stuff like that. And so that is the risk. But a tool that we have, if we want to reject cultural delusion and attempt to see truth or find truth or see accurately, right? By getting rid of the things that create delusion for us, like cultural meaning systems and stuff like that, then practicing compassion and altruism, forgiveness, that kind of thing, sort of replaces the culture as an anxiety buffer and allows us then to be free from the cultural delusions and stuff like that, and so we can push out further into that what I call it frontier we were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah.
So it empowers that frontier journey is the love and compassion and forgiveness and all that kind of thing and stuff, because it creates confidence, it reduces anxiety, creates the need for delusion, right? And then as a species or just as an individual, you're then allowed to start questioning more and more about the nature of reality and stuff, because you sort of had this base,
Yeah. Interesting, very interesting. I think the bad news is that we're not going to be able to answer it in 1,000 words or less. But the good news is that we can continue to explore our understanding of what the answer is. I like your question about the. Well, it's a kind of, I think it belongs in what we call epistemology, ways of knowing. And how do we know if something is actually what it appears to be, or if it's a delusion in the sense of that it's disconnected from the reality? And how do we do that? Or even can we do that? Those are big questions. And I think they're probably the kinds of questions that philosophy, the practice of the mental exercise that we call philosophy, I think philosophy is equipped to explore and maybe discover some pretty good answers, some fairly accurate answers to how do we know if it's real or if it's delusional.
Let me finish one more thing, because there was like a couple categories I threw out there. One was perceiving accuracy accurately, but there was this other one. And how do we suss out any sort of like truth, moral truth, or ethical truth in from the world when it all seems to be survival of the fittest and carnage and all that kind of stuff, right? But I think that this thing gives us an answer to that too. I love the Dalai Lama because he always has this statement before he says anything. He says, if your goal is to be happy, right?
Yeah.
If that's your goal, to be happy, then this is, and he describes compassion, all the things we're talking about now, right?
Yeah.
So, right, and I'll say that. So there is no moral truth, there is no ethical truth, but if your goal in life is to be happy, right?
Yeah.
Then you can develop a sense of morality and ethics,
that pertains to that achievement.
That achievement, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's an individual choice that each person decides consciously or unconsciously. What's the point? And if happiness is the point, well, then here's what will contribute to that. To being there, being where you're happy. Being in a state of mind in which you're happy. That all adds up.
Okay, and I just had a good one. So, now, let's talk about meaning, right? Symbolic meaning, let's say, versus spiritual meaning, or whatever, right? Because one of the reasons why being compassionate reduces anxiety is because it increases a sense of meaning and purpose, right? So, but it's not a symbolic meaning and purpose. It almost exists as if there is such a thing as an actual meaning and purpose, right? So a meaning and purpose that exists in I don't know what mode it would exist in, but it actually provides you meaning. To whereas in symbolism, God damn it! I had a hold of it. I had like a little insight there, but I'm just losing it now.
No, I think I think I'm with you though, Jason. I think I get it. Let me see if I can put it in words here. Put in words what I think you're talking about is well, it takes me to the menu of the meal. The menu is a symbol.
Yeah.
Does that get it?
Yeah, but go ahead, explain it so for other people.
Yeah. Yeah, the menu is a symbol that represents the possibilities of a meal. And we spend most of the time in modern, postmodern society uh, chewing on the menu. And the consequence of chewing on the menu is that it doesn't taste very good, so we're not very happy.
Mm.
You know, the Dalai Lama might say, well, eat the meal instead of the menu if you want to be happy. It's not very nourishing. It depletes us because we're not nourishing ourselves, right? So the symbol of something is just not the same thing. It does not, in terms of karma, the cause and effect, the process of life, the fabric of reality. The symbol does not function the same thing as what the symbol symbolizes.
Mm-hmm.
So symbolic love, I can go through rituals and say, you know, I love my wife, right? But if I don't have that quickening in my own soul, in my own consciousness of that attitude of a deep personal care and concern for mutual well-being, then I'm only symbolically expressing that deep care and concern. I'm not expressing the deep care and concern because it doesn't exist in here. I have to create it within my own being and then express it for it to be the real thing rather than the symbolic thing. Now I'm just responding back kind of at my interpretation of what you were just saying. It's really is, I guess, how close is that to what you were talking
No, that's exactly
about?
what I was saying. Like
Yeah.
the actual meal is meaning and purpose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that these behaviors provide that.
Well, and the
Yeah,
thing is, though, with meaning, there is symbolic meaning, and symbolic, the
right.
meaning that we get out of symbolism is very real, and we can notice how our amygdala responds to symbolic meaning because it reduces the angst, the guilt, et cetera, the existential angst. So our brain is responding to that symbolic meaning by
No,
by by reducing it. But it's the problem is that, like you said earlier, it's still there. It's constantly, it doesn't really. It's treating a symptom, not a cause.
well, the difference is that the cultural meaning systems where the anxiety is depleted in action, right, is depleted in the process of attaining $1 million. Once you have the $1 million, it provides no buffering. You're still anxious, so now you got to go get $2 million or $3 million
Yeah.
or more
Well,
power, right?
if you're really good though with the symbolic world, you can have the same experience of having the security of $1 million by just thinking about something. And there's certain religious practices that apply that function, that our nervous system can reduce the anxiety by believing in a symbol of something with that that we can't get the $1 million, so to speak. We're speaking metaphorically here, uh, but that's secondary to your main point. It's peripheral to your main point.
But whatever it is, it's the cultural activity that relieves anxiety and the belief that obtainment will provide meaning, right? What
Yeah, right.
Obtainment does not provide meaning. The act of attaining is what reduces the anxiety. So like
Yeah,
you
but what
never
you're
actually
saying is,
attain any
so you're saying it's the behavior
right.
that buffers the anxiety.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what I'm saying is I have observed for myself and other people, I kind of, yeah, anyway, I've observed with other people where there's no action at all. It's all cerebral.
Oh,
It's all
delusion.
subjective
Delusion
symbolism.
can have an anxiety reducing effect too, but it's the
There you go.
process of generating the delusion, right? It's a stream.
Yeah,
It's just a
but
stream.
but people there are people who have the ability to create those results without doing any behavior.
All right.
Strictly on believing their conviction of what the symbols represent that they believe and that it's strictly the believing is what makes it so.
All right.
And it's like it tricks the amygdala or whatever is our survival mechanism related to the anxiety, right? To where it reduces the anxiety.
Oh,
But I agree with you that comes up short.
and then there is, I guess, that part was missing, and then that quote that you have about the congealing, right?
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
congealed is well rounded and almost, I guess, complete. I guess they've accomplished the mission, so to speak, and they've effectively become
Yeah,
unconscious.
I think I agree with you there if I'm understanding what you're saying, because it says you must be on guard always, uh, Justin. You must be always on guard, Justin, against congealing.
To your final
And
self. Yeah.
yeah, to the final self. And it's like, well, that depends on who the person is, because I think there's people. Well, go back to the people who can do it all cerebrally, just within their own mind, right?
I know, but it's the powers in the
and
metaphor, and you're nitpicking the metaphor, but I want the metaphor to be understood, so we have the power of the metaphor, so I get my point across. You're nitpicking the metaphor. It's like, I just want the power of the metaphor.
what's the metaphor that I'm picking? I'm nitpicking.
I know about the congealed thing, right? So it's,
Yeah.
so it's a quote from a book, and so they're saying you have to protect
Right.
against congealing to your final self, because
Yeah.
basically that's the same as being dead, right? And so, oh man, I wish I had the quote, but I'm not saying that's absolute truth or anything, but it's a powerful metaphor to sort of describe what I'm trying to talk
Yeah,
about.
but it's a metaphor for death, a kind of death.
You know what's weird? When I search your name, for some reason I don't get your emails, because you sent me that that quote a while
Well,
back.
you want? I've got it right here on the wall. You want me?
Oh
to
yeah,
read it?
yeah, uh huh.
Yeah, okay. There are two kinds of people, she once decreed to me emphatically. One kind you can just tell by looking at them, that tell by looking at them at what point they congealed into their final selves. It might be a very nice self, but you can expect no more surprises from it. Whereas the other kind keep moving, changing. They are fluid. They keep moving forward and making new trysts with life, and the notion of it keeps them young. In my opinion, they are the only people who are still alive. You must be constantly on guard, Justin, against congealing.
Right. And so I guess the congealed person, it kind of like how I said that it's always anxiety's depleted in cultural action, and it's never done. It's a constant stream. But I guess I think it's true. I guess what this person is saying, that no, there is a state of homeostasis you can reach in delusion, so to speak, right? To where you become reflexive again in responding to the culture from your cultural role template, sort of,
Right.
like, and you become unconscious and dead. So maybe, I guess there is, a way. Anyways, I was just saying that's another category of what we're talking about is the congealed one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I don't know that this is absolutely universal. She does the author does, Godwin. Gail Godwin was the author. So her character does say something about, in my opinion, they are the only people who are still alive, the ones that are always making new trysts with life.
Right.
And we kind of settle into into our role, and we don't need to think and anticipate. We don't need free will. We have a role to play. We know what it is, and we just play it. And what I've recently discovered is that there's a lot of people who congeal into that role that they're playing, and they're happy.
Yeah.
They're content.
They're in
They're not
homeostasis. Yeah.
the homeostasis. And I don't know that we would call it thriving, but if thriving doesn't matter to them, if they don't feel an angst about an urging about thriving, then just surviving really well, if that's where they are, they're definitely not the same as the people who are always making new trysts with life, and putting themselves in places where they don't know what the hell to do. They have to figure it out. The creatives, it reminds me of with myself, I see my life as an art form, and I'm the artist. And so I'm always painting a picture, creating something with the space of the canvas that is my life.
Yeah, so that gets back to something we were talking. Well, let's see. That's a whole can of worms there. But I think we came back around and we kind of touched on everything pretty thoroughly that I wanted to talk about. Did you?
Yeah, recap. What were the things you wanted to talk about? Because we'll probably be able to recognize how it all fits together.
Well, I was just thinking, with all the ambiguity and anxiety, not only associated with our normal existential stuff about death and freedom and all that kind of stuff, there's another level of angst associated with how do you suss out a sense of morality when we don't even have the capacity to accurately perceive reality, kind of thing.
Right.
And I think that's how we got into the love and compassion stuff, and how that sort of, can... well, I guess in I don't know.
Well, that can be...
We came back around.
That can be... what you just said there about the love and compassion, that can be the basis of a moral vector to fly by.
If you want to be happy.
My moral vector is do what my love would do. Now, how well do I understand that? Not very well most of the time, but it gives me something to guess at that for me, I'm still comfortable at 80 years old for having, lived my life by that vector, by that guidance, the true north. Long before I even realized that was my ethos in life, I was busy with it. It's over time. Eventually, I began to understand that was the guiding point of reference for me to live my life, and so that's how I handled that question of how do I create a moral directive for myself, moral precepts to live by, when I don't have any franchise on truth to be assured that it's absolutely true.
Right.
And that's how I've handled that question so far.
It is, how do you maintain how can you avoid overwhelming yourself with anxiety and then participating in the exploration of the frontier sort of thing?
How do you do that?
Outside
You've done that as much as I have.
No, I'm saying that's what we were talking about in this episode, right?
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's to bring it back around. These were the kind of the points.
Right. Right.
But I think, and I want to talk about this in our next episode, not this one, but a really important piece of this too that I think we should dig into is the shadow. That my capacity for murder and participation in genocide, right?
Yeah, right.
Acknowledging the capacity in yourself for evil, or whatever you want to call it. I don't like the word evil, but for destruction and murder and chaos, right? So I think maybe we can get into that, and I would like to dig a little bit deeper into Buddhist philosophy in the next one, if we can.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can do that.
All right.
So I guess that's kind of a wrap for today.
I think so.
And we want to thank everybody that has taken the time to listen, that might still be listening at this point. And be sure and comment we'd like to hear what you have to say. If you have questions about what we've asked, or you have questions about what we've presented, yeah, some of it we've presented questions. Be sure and make the comments, and we can respond.
And we will respond too. If you ask us something, we'll respond in our episode. I think that'd be cool.
Right.
Yeah. All right.
So as always, hit the bell and do the subscribe thing, so we can develop a little bit of a community here.
Cool. All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.